Welcome back to Resilient Rehab and Performance's 4-Minute PT. Today we're going to be continuing to look at the climber we discussed in our last case study who developed some pain on the front of her left shoulder. Now at this point she's been working on her rehab. She doesn't have too much pain with raising the arm out to the side. Her range of motion is a lot better, not quite 100%. She no longer has very much pain with strong pulling movements, but she's still not quite back to where she was pre-injury wise with strength and confidence using that left shoulder. So at this point in her rehab, our main goal is to build up her reservoir of strength through that left shoulder so she has enough capacity to do what she's asking of it climbing-wise, as well as confidence using it in climbing-specific positions. So when it comes to the exercises we should choose at this stage, I think there's a couple main categories. First, we want to train the muscles that she had injured. So these are the muscles, in her case, that externally rotated the shoulder as well as abducted the shoulder, so the back half of the rotator cuff and the top half of the rotator cuff. We also want to focus on strengthening the muscles and tendons that were a little irritable or likely pain generators. In her case, this was likely the biceps long head and potentially some of the pec tendons. In these cases, we want to build up the tolerance to load and tension through the sinew and the tendons of those muscles so they're less painful when you're using them. So to strengthen abduction, lateral raises are some of the best exercises for this. I like to start doing them with the patient hanging off of a door jamb at an angle so you can start strengthening that previously painful range of motion with a little bit less discomfort and a little less apprehension. As you continue to get stronger, you can return to upright and then increase the weights of these as you're going along. Pressing motions are really good for strengthening the back half of the rotator cuff. So plank motions, forward pressing motions, overhead pressing motions with a dumbbell, barbell, handstands, all these motions where you're pressing the shoulder forward or overhead really recruit the back half of the rotator cuff and are great for strengthening and stabilizing that shoulder in the more overhead position. Then finally, to build up that tolerance to load through the biceps long head, eccentric bicep curls while you're reclined are a beautiful way of doing this and increasing your tolerance to tension through the front half of the shoulder as well as that biceps tendon. When you're doing these, you really focus on slowly lowering the weight down towards the floor and choose a weight that's heavy enough it's challenging to curl back up. You want to use the opposite hand to help it return back up to the starting position. And again, we can apply these principles to flies while you're only controlling the falling portion of it. Allowing that pec muscle to lengthen, those tendons to be loaded in a stretch position is a great way to make that muscle more flexible, as well as a lot more tolerant to stretching and loading that you do while you're climbing. So while we're building our reservoir of strength, we also want to make sure we're building up our body's ability to control motion through that shoulder. I'm sure we've all seen bodybuilders that had huge muscles, but were really inflexible or really had a hard time controlling their body movements. That's not what we want to become through rehab. So adding in motions where you're having to pivot your body on a fixed shoulder are great ways to strengthen that shoulder in a climbing specific way, because that's primarily what we do when we're loading our shoulder when we're climbing. We're fixing it and moving our body off of it. So doing a half Turkish get up is a beautiful way of strengthening the shoulder on a moving body. If you don't have access to a kettlebell, you can use a milk carton like I'm doing in the video here. Doing planks with twists, doing down dogs with twist, doing banded overhead carries where you're allowing the weight to swing while you're kind of walking like you're a little bit drunk. That's a great way to get those muscles firing in the shoulder and controlling all kinds of crazy movements, working the rotator cuff and working in stability in that previously vulnerable position. Choose a weight that feels challenging but very doable with these exercises. And finally, we want to strengthen that shoulder in positions that replicate our sticking spots in projects and hard routes that we're working on. So one way I like doing this is get on the wall in a lock off just shy of that irritating range of motion for the shoulder, and then reach overhead, reach out to the side, reach underneath while you're holding the shoulder as fixed as you can. As that starts to feel more comfortable, then you can start to add a little bit of twisting on that left shoulder while you're making those movements. This will help build your tolerance to using that shoulder, strength of the shoulder, as well as a little bit more trust of the shoulder on the wall. Because the last thing you want to be doing when you're trying to red point your route is think, is my shoulder going to hold up through this? You want to be able to trust that shoulder implicitly. So at this stage of rehab, we really want to focus on building up your body's strength reserve through the injured area. We also want to build up your tolerance to loading and controlling that shoulder in positions that are specific to what you're going to be asking of your shoulder. So depending on your injury and depending on the routes that you're trying to climb, those specific movements will vary, but the principles will still be the same. So if you have any specific rehab questions or an injury yourself, feel free to reach out to me on resilientrp.com or send me a message here on Instagram